Thank you very much. So, hello everyone. Thanks for showing up today. Welcome to our talk in which we want to share with you how we became interested in this particular area, which is using, of course, recorded video feedback, and how we've been influenced and inspired by online games communities, particularly game streamers, and how they use these new technologies and services to solve particular higher education or problems of their own that I think will be effective inside of higher education. So they've been innovating in these spaces, I think, often long before higher education has even gotten near it. And so it's been particularly eye-opening for us and a lot of fun as well, but particularly it's been extremely beneficial and useful to our students. So we want to give you basically two unique perspectives today on how video feedback has been implemented, starting with the visual arts and design view and then moving on to sort of more textual / literature view from my colleague Greg. But basically just an overview of what we're going to cover in this so far. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal journey, about how I got here, because I think that's interesting how this how we bridge this to higher education. As a bit of a nerd / gamer myself, it's pretty interesting stuff. And of course, what we've been learning from these communities and these streamers just on an observational basis. I've been engaging with that for some time now. And of course, we're going to give you plenty of examples of this stuff as well. So we do have some video content. And hopefully the connection will hold up just fine. But if not, of course, I'll be happy to send a link to these slides as well afterwards. You lot can have a look for yourselves. But I think that should come across just fine. And then we're going to talk about, obviously the benefits of this stuff. That's the important part. Is it useful? Is it applicable? And why should I use it? And of course, moving on to overcoming some of the barriers or resistances that we've come across, maybe some advice and how to handle those. We've got a few things to say there, especially in regards to things like data and GDPR more recently. And I think we'll probably be up for sharing some further reflections on the distinct discipline areas. I come from a digital arts and design background, and Greg comes from an economics and business background. So that often, very contrasting areas, which makes it a really interesting place to be. But obviously, just in terms of introductions, my name's Ryan, lecturer in media design, and my colleague, he can introduce himself later, but just for now, you can call him Greg, and he'll say his piece later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause temporarily, get off the seat, and let him sit down to do his own introduction. But essentially, in terms of my journey, like I've been saying to a lot of people, I've been teaching for it's probably over 7 years, but in terms of a full-time teaching role, 6 years. And I think as long as I can remember, while I am a digital arts lecturer, I do believe a lot in hands-on activities, very practical approach to things, but I do believe in embracing technology where it matters. So I am a learning technologist in that regards. But I think in the last few years in particularly, me and Greg ourselves have become increasingly experimental in our pedagogical approaches. Because we're looking to solve, particular problems that answer questions to the pressures that we face in higher education. I'm sure you feel some of those yourself. And so we're always looking for new and interesting ways that technology can maybe solve some of those. And it's always interesting to hear other people's opinions in these things as well. So essentially, basically got to a place where we saw genuine innovation. There were small innovations along the way that just never really went anywhere. So I kind of, as a reflective practitioner myself, and I teach sort of courses and lessons in reflection, but I really started to take a much more a deeper approach to this. I'm looking for ways that could really impact my feedback and assessment practice in new and interesting ways. I find that the norms of the school that I was in at the time, we're often, we're going to use a different type of paper. I was like, what? That's just not the sort of innovation I'm looking for. I was looking for something much more revolutionary, something that was, visionary, and would have been a big leap for myself. So in that regards, I think myself and other members of the school, we were good at taking small steps in our practice, but I think it was time for something more radical. So I think it's important to go through those reflective cycles to look at how you teach and why you teach, and of course what you can do to amend that practice. So eventually, my approach does look something like this in general, and I was quite happy with this. I create a reflective community of practitioners, and essentially what I do is I try to bring my artists together together to rely on feedback from me, feedback from each other, and of course there's other benefits to the classroom there as well. I think that would be a very different talk if we go down that route. But of course that community revolved around things like using, you know, class activities and social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. They were sort of becoming normal things, but again they were small things, and I wanted to do something a bit more radical. An assessment that's well, it can be a little bit boring, so I try to make things as fun as possible. But essentially, you know, that summative feedback and grading in semester is it's a normal practice we all do. But I find that a little that's where the frustration really began. So where does feedback happen was something that we often talk about, and on paper I think higher education institutes are probably very good at saying, you know, feedback happens here in these kind of these certain times, these points in the calendar where feedback is meant to happen. When I find that the reality was often very much different, especially in an arts style course where I thought looked a little bit more like this, where essentially September through to December, say this is my first semester of the year, feedback's an ongoing process. It's something that happens all the time, and so I think we lack the language really to kind of capture some of that activity. That's you know, when a student asks a question and I answer it, and I'm always giving oversight, and I'm not the only source of feedback in that classroom. So I find that feedback is an ongoing, it's a ubiquitous process that's always there, and quite often we actually don't train students to know that that is feedback and that it's happening to them all the time. But anyway, so strategies to manage expectation was kind of the launching platform here. But essentially what I wanted to do was get towards a point where the feedback that I did give, that bit at the end, that the wrap up was something much more substantial and more unique than previous. So initially my ideas started with a colleague, Dave Lyons. Don't worry if you don't hear anything here, by the way. I've muted all the video on purpose just so that I can talk over it. And Dave had actually he's made, I think it's thousands of videos at this point. They were kind of short bursts of insight and feedback to students that he'd been doing for a long time. And I think for the first time I heard that he did video feedback, I didn't listen. And it was 2 years later I came back to him and went, Dave, did you mention video feedback? So eventually we got there, and I started watching some of his videos. He gave me a link, and I was like, I loved. He was very concise, and definitely took this, like, you know, it's a very positive, constructive view. And he's also a very cool, calm person, which always helps. You know, the feedback was given in a way that I thought was actually really approachable, and that was something that definitely influenced me. But there's other things that I didn't like about his videos, and I hope he doesn't hear that. Which is essentially, I wanted to take the production values further. I wanted the videos to be a bit longer. I've got a lot of stuff to say when it comes to feedback, but you know, I didn't want to go near video for a long time, I'll admit it. I absolutely feared the aspect of going on camera and talking to students. I'm not a natural speaker, and especially with a camera in front of me, I kind of dreaded it. But I started playing around with video for a while, which was creating small clips using just my mobile phone and playing around with webcams, just trying to create other bits of I was essentially trying to get my students to be a bit more creative. So I was creating these little demonstration videos, little small kind of 1 minute videos that showed them how they can use paint or ink or spray or anything just to kind of come up with a quick idea, even if it was messy and a bit disregardable. But I find that, you know, just even playing with the technology was giving me a little bit of confidence. Eventually came along, we launched a couple of Future Learn courses, and we got a video guy called Duncan in to do some recording, and he absolutely insisted on filming me in these artistic looking shadows, and that was I'll admit it, like, you know, I was deeply apprehensive, and then whenever I seen these videos at the end of it, I was like, you know what, I really liked that. So it was definitely a step forward for me in terms of like thinking about, you know what, getting on camera, showing my face isn't really that scary. At the end of the day, they're my students and they have to stare at me every day anyway. So why not trouble them one stage further? So anyway, it starts to become interesting. There's like an amalgamation of events happening here. So like, not only is my own confidence, self-doubt disappears, but I'm also really curious. And around the same time, I'm starting to watch a lot more of this new channel called Twitch, which is just a website. If you go to twitch.tv, you can access this stuff yourself. And essentially, I was starting to get blown away by this online community of gamers who just share themselves playing computer games. And I thought, like everybody else, oh my goodness, is this what the millennials have become? And the usual sort of trepidations. But essentially, it was also like I was also kind of amazed, kind of jealous. Why didn't this exist when I was a kid? But it blew me away that like these young people were setting up and producing their own channels with their own content, putting themselves out front. And I really loved that style. It was fantastic. And the fact that they're using things like social media and internet to continually broadcast themselves their way, how they want, it was something that really kind of flicked a switch in my brain. So just to kind of update you on what sort of live streaming and streamers do. So if you've been on YouTube or Facebook, you'll have seen some live stuff before. These people are streaming live from their phones or from their desktop PCs at home. And of course, you've things like even this webinar would be a form of streaming, I guess. But what I really loved is that this was a specialist service that was designed to let people film themselves playing their favorite computer games, and they were getting thousands of viewers. And so if you had a decent enough setup, you could essentially broadcast yourself. It doesn't cost you any money other than a little bit of equipment, a webcam, a microphone, and a decent computer, which most people tend to have access to. And these streamers, that's a sort of term that they used to refer to themselves, where they're the broadcasters themselves or presenters. And this format essentially would eventually become the inspiration for the style or approach that we took to video feedback that we thought was really interesting. And so when I say interesting, I'm definitely interested. So I like to play some games at home. I play online with a team of like up to 5 friends or so, and we come together online to play a game. Just a little example there in the corner. But essentially, there's 5 of us online on the same channel, playing the same game, and we like to fight our foes. Just a little test of strategy. And I became interested in using Twitch streaming, to broadcast our gameplay to see if we could get any fans. Turns out we couldn't. We weren't good enough. But what did change my mind, and this is the key moment, and this is something that I urge every one of you to go and have a look at. But go have a look at Gregory Peppo here. He is a Twitch streamer actually, and well, we can't see his video here, but while Twitch is dedicated to games, I found this other section called the creative section. So being a creative person, I had to have a nosy, and what I found was truly mind-blowing. I find that there was people who were painting or making music or playing piano or painting their little figurines. There were thousands of young people showing other people how they do things, and that is raw education. These people were fantastic at sharing their practice. And for instance, Gregory Peppo here, he paints live on Twitch. He's got over 80 videos that's all available to view. He'll stream for hours at a time of his painting process. He will talk to the thousands of viewers that he has at any one time and doesn't charge a penny for it. It's completely free, and you can access this person. He's not out of reach, and I find that really changed something inside of me. So it was interesting to see that there is a generation of people that are becoming very self-educating, and I think they're doing that outside and without the permission of universities, and I find that fascinating. So I like to say that there are a generation of accidental educators coming. So essentially, the more I watched and the more I learned about this platform, and I find that it is growing. Increasingly, students coming into higher education are very aware of Twitch. In fact, it's one of their favorite platforms. They love these channels, and most of them will follow very famous or popular streamers. So often I like to talk about, what does this actually look like? So there's a lot of detail here, and apologies, I'm going to skip some of it because that detail doesn't necessarily matter, because I want Greg to have some insight as well. But essentially, we use a piece of software called OBS, which you can download for free to play with, and we use that to broadcast or record. You don't have to broadcast live, by the way. You can record video, which is what we choose to do, We think broadcasting raises all sorts of issues and problems, especially with GDPR. But essentially what we liked about the Twitch format was that you can see the face and you can see the screen, and that's where we wanted to start. So my first attempt at video feedback looked something like this, which was my face floating in the corner. That's me, by the way. Terribly handsome, I think you'll all agree. And essentially, the student's work is that large image behind me. I bring that up, and eventually I can actually draw and paint on top of their work in real time while I'm just having a conversation to the camera about their work. So it's direct, very, very personal, and very, very relevant feedback that the students tended to love. So essentially, you know, it was fun, it was well received, and the students absolutely loved it. It was the first time in my career where I had a deluge of emails that told the students were absolutely in love with it. They were enamored with it. However, those first videos that I produced were very hastily produced and they lacked structure, and so I definitely decided that next time round I wanted a script and I wanted some production values. I wanted this to look a lot better. So eventually, the second time around, the videos looked like this. And you can see here that I've actually got an introduction graphic. So I've got the module name, the module number, the module name, and then we'll go into the student's work. So again, the student will see my face in the corner. There's a little bit of branding, you know, it's a digital concept visualization, and there's an example of student coursework there, and I've got the permission from the students to present all this stuff. And so what I do is I give that student feedback in real time, and I can actually use my Photoshop to zoom in and out of certain features, and I use my Wacom digital pen to kind of comment and critique the work. My setup at work, by the way, looks a little bit like this. It's an expensive setup at work. You know, it's something you can actually do for a lot less money. But there I've got my drawing screen, I've got my main monitor, and I've got my microphone and webcam all ready to go. And so on a basic level, that kit's actually pretty accessible, but that Wacom screen is a little bit pricey, but you can do that much, much cheaper. Happy to take questions on that later, though. But there you go. It's all about having that high-quality webcam, a secondary tablet or monitor, if you wish, high-quality mic, and, of course, a large monitor. It's good to be able to see things. So a lot of the time what I'm actually doing on my monitor is I'm say, here's a piece of student work. I can use this tablet to actually critique the work. And remember, the software is recording everything I do, as well as presenting the student with a picture of my face and recording what I have to say. And so it was really, really revolutionary for me. And so just to give you an example of what these videos might look like, and so the student does get this kind of real-time critique and breakdown of their work, areas that I think need improved, areas that I think are great, and in general they seem to work quite well. So what does this look like being recorded? So here's two perspectives. One, there's obviously what they see, which is my face, but just so you can see there on the right-hand side, that's what I look like when I'm getting on with this stuff, just so you can get that in your imagination space. But ultimately, it's generally, you know, it's a little bit of hassle the first time you do it, but once you get used to the format, it's actually really easy and really good fun, and a good excuse to pressure your TLE and managers to get some nice equipment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute up quickly, move over to Greg, and let him continue to show off how he uses video feedback for things that are non-artistic. Okay, so just give me 10 seconds and I'll be with you again.
Hi, my name's Greg, and I'm an economics lecturer, so nothing to do with Lyons kind of stuff at all. But the purpose of me coming in this was to show that we can use the value of video feedback in other scenarios. So I tend to deal with, as it says on the screen there, large chunks of text and equations, diagrams, and that sort of stuff. Can you move it on now, please? So yeah, just hold on to the next one, please. Sorry. Yeah, so it's this kind of thing where we've got a lot of information, and then giving written feedback on that, that takes a lot of time. It's remarkably more efficient as well as easier to talk over this sort of stuff and to work your way through the information that the student's giving you, especially when it comes to PhD chapters and that sort of stuff. Thanks, right. So yeah, this is the sort of thing I'd be faced with quite often, where you've got a variety of things, where you've got diagrams, you've got equations, you've got tables, you've got information, and this is all stuff that you want to discuss or talk about, and it can be easier, even on your thought process, to record it rather than write it. And a big part of that is that there's a prompt there for whenever you do see the student, or at the end of the video you can say, yeah, what do you think? You can make your own video and give it back to me, especially when it comes to overseas PhD students and master's degree students as well. So yeah, there's value in it, whether you're doing the arty stuff that Ryan does, and this sort of a thing that I do as well. Move on. We did an experiment, an undergraduate experiment, with 19 or 20 students, and this is where things become a little bit, you have to be aware of what you're doing. I think it's easy to get into a situation where you're keen and you're wanting to try something out. There's a lot of other things that need to align when you're dealing with mechanisms that have been in existence for a long time, and you're starting to try and change it a little bit to keep up with, as Ryan explains, how students learn. So nowadays, we think it's more important to be more than just the guy who turns up for an hour or two every week, imparts a whole load of information and walks away again and maybe marks an exam. You need to give great consideration to which module you're going to launch this kind of thing in first, and I'm happy to discuss that personally or offline later. But there are certain hurdles that might need to be crossed, or might not need to be, but you need to be aware of them. Ryan mentioned the GDPR. You will all have people in your universities whose job it is to know this stuff, and you need this chapter and verse, whether you're dealing with medial servers or YouTube or anything like that at all. There's a whole load of things that we know now are perfectly legal, but when you're being challenged, and it's then your job to not only learn the software, do the video feedback, and then you have to prove it's legal, that becomes challenging and time consuming as well. There's all sorts of stuff that can potentially go wrong if you haven't prepped it. So it's not just about making the video and marking the work and all that sort of stuff as well. It's all the background stuff. So you need your managers to be aware exactly of what you're doing, how it works. You need your data protection people to know exactly what you're doing as well, so that, yes, the students get huge value from this, absolutely, and you'll get lots of, as Ryan said, lots of great feedback on the feedback from students. But from the professional point of view, the execution of these things the first time can be complicated. After that, it's not anything like as challenging as sitting down to physically in pen or in type mark 40, 50 or 60 essays. I'll hand you back to Ryan now. Right, mate.
Thank you for that, Greg. All right, so just looking at the time, of course, and of 2 seconds, I've lost my headset already. There it is. Sorry about that. What we're going to do is just try to wrap up quickly. What we had planned, of course, was we wanted a couple of discussion points, such as, do you currently use any form of audio feedback in your teaching or assessment practice? Part B of that was, how do you feel about video feedback as part of your teaching or assessment practice? So if that spurs on some questions, that would be really useful. And part 2 of that would be, do you have any personal hesitations or reasons for resisting video feedback methods? We'd like to know, or maybe put your mind at ease, because we do know one thing: it doesn't belong everywhere, and we certainly think you have to make considerations towards where it should be. And of course, part B is, does your institute present any sort of resistance to the use or implementation of video feedback methods as well? So maybe that might inspire some questions from you, but ultimately I'll close with just kind of giving you a bigger picture of my ambitions, or our ambitions at least, with this current project. We're going to look more into sort of where live streaming belongs in higher education. So we believe in actually maybe try and actually launch our own education Twitch channel. Might reach out to Twitch to get some help with that. Or I use online chat channels to reach students outside of class hours, trying to be a bit more flexible on things. That can be controversial as well, though. And also looking more towards other forms of video content and where or not we can embed this in social media. We think the landscape is changing, and we have to consider how new generations and technologically social media savvy generations of students coming through are going to do things. So we've got a lot of really cool things on the horizon, and we do need to prepare and be ahead of the curve for that, or else we all get caught out again. So essentially, thanks for listening, everyone. Our details are there if you want to contact either of us. If you've got any further questions or want to set up some other discussions, we're always happy to help or consult. But anyway, there's some additional resources if we just want to hand over to questions now. I can see there's a couple starting to come into the channel. Let me see. Let's have a look. There we go. So yeah, I can see there's a bunch of things coming in. I just got to scroll up here. Sorry to hear. Nothing about see things depending on version Skype. All right, so the first one comes from Alison, actually, which is some people may be concerned that they might say the wrong thing, especially in terms of live streaming the play. Could you offer any words of wisdom in this? Yes, absolutely. So, Alison, I mentioned earlier that the very first video feedback I did was kind of winging it a little bit, I think the backgrounds we come from, we tend to be, in the casual situation, I might swear more than I should. So I was definitely very worried about accidentally swearing on video. I've certainly done it in front of a class before, usually to comedic effect, I'll be honest with you. But I've not done it once yet, but what I definitely did do is, in the second time that I ran my video feedback sessions, I actually had a very loose pre-made script that was pretty much tied to the, if you think about the rubric for grading, I actually let the rubric for grading be my guidelines. And so I actually had a language and a format set out so that I wasn't running over time. I wasn't saying things I didn't need to say while I was commenting and feedbacking on the students' work. So that was really useful for structuring the video feedback. And I've adhered to that ever since. So that's been really useful. So in terms of saying the right thing, so we don't actually broadcast this live anyway. We like the format that Twitch provides, but we actually record our videos before we send them to a student rather than live, because in case there are any sort of such mistakes, we definitely want to be able to catch those out. But that's not happened once yet. So moving on. So the next question is, could Twitch be used to support wider lecture recording practices? The first answer there is yes. And how does intellectual property work regarding Twitch? One of the barriers I previously encountered when encouraging use of video in teaching environment is the use of who owns IP. That's a particularly useful question. Craig, you might be better at this than me, but we've, so just this question at the side here. So if you scroll on down, you should be able to see it. Okay, so I'll let Greg read that. In the meantime, I think that first part of the question, could Twitch be used to support wider lecturing recording practice? It certainly can, especially once you've got through the initial techno setup for live streaming and broadcasting. I think there's all sorts of opportunities. We've worked with our IT department recently to finally actually have OBS installed in all lecturing machines. So I have that option. I can actually broadcast live to the internet if I really want. The university so far hasn't resisted it, and I think actually in terms of moving forward, universities and teaching and learning departments will be looking for new ways to be a bit more liberal about getting the university's name out there, and being on Twitch where there are millions of potential new recruitable students might be a really good way of doing it, even if it's just partial or some content.
I was just going to say about the IP. We looked into that. The IP belongs to the university. There's no argument about that at all. They supply the kit that we use, and we're doing it in to their students basically. So this belongs entirely to the university, and the same is also true if you were to record a complete lecture. We went to a seminar recently at St Andrews University where it became obvious that once you've uploaded a complete lecture, it's pretty much up to the university to release that. Maybe if you were not well or that kind of situation, but then who's got control over it as well as ownership? It's two slightly separate things, but in both scenarios, it's the university. Susie, I can see you've asked about do you read the script? I will have read the document as if there was no video at all, and then I'll have made some annotations, and at that point I'll have an idea in my head what are the things I want to say to the student. I might well scribble a couple of things down as well, but the value of this is that I can scroll through and mark as live, not live, but as live, the video for the student, so the student can actually see me circling stuff or whatever as I commentate on the work. So it does take a little bit longer, Susie, than just using Turnitin or whatever you guys use. But again, the benefits of that accrue to the student, and also over time, I think, to us as lecturers as well.
Cool. I'm just going to check because I'm scrolling up down this little panel here, see if there are any further. Someone's typing. I think some people might be concerned. Yeah, that's okay. I think we've got most of the questions so far. I can see Susie's typing. So thanks, most helpful. Right. None?
No, Susie, absolutely none. It's really surprising, and that's from either PhD students, master students, or the cohort of undergraduates that we just tried it, or I just tried it with there in the last few weeks. It's surprising. Well, it surprised me. I didn't even need to ask the students, what do you think of this? I got emails saying thanks. And the key word that actually comes out, Susie, a lot is the word personal. The student feels that even though it's a one-sided conversation, it's still better than reading the same drab stuff that they're reading maybe several times. Bear in mind also that I did this on a fourth-year class, so they've had 4 years of the standard type of feedback, and perhaps, yeah, there's a novelty to it, but there are also absolutely no negative. And I have to say also, not all the students are good marks, and that's one of the values of doing the video thing, is it can be a bit less cold, I think, when you can talk your way through feedback to a student who's probably going to have to reset that particular thing. But certainly we can discuss this in great detail later at another time if you so wish. There's lots of things I could say on it, but basically no bad feedback whether the student's getting a first class or a reset, Susie.
Just to pick up at the end there, I think there's two really cool points there, which is one is that students listening to what you have to say are going to hear it, I think, in the way it's meant to be heard. Students with anxiety or worries about marking can read things the wrong way because text is just text. It's tonally deaf. And what we find is that we've got around being able to say actually some pretty hard things the right way. So one of the greatest things that happened to me, I deal a lot with artists, and we know what we're like if you've ever had to deal with us. And so one of the things I was most worried about was like, how am I going to give video feedback to a student who has clearly failed or is failing? Because that's going to be hard feedback to hear. They were the people I got the most praise from, and that was a real revelation to me. And so I use private YouTube channels in compliance with our GDPR, don't worry. And these students, they leave very long messages for me, letting me know how helpful that feedback has been for them to improving. And I didn't ask for that. So it's for the reason we're carrying this project forward so much is that it's been the students response that has driven this. They love it. They absolutely love it. It's adding real value to our courses and our modules that we deliver, and it's giving a real sense of satisfaction, which is of course one of the metrics everyone tries to measure. So it's obviously this is a very short presentation. There's a lot of detail we've had to skip on to fit stuff in, but I'm sure that at some point down the line we're going to have more opportunities to discuss some of our findings and some of the better details. What we wanted to do was actually show you some of that student feedback, but time is just one of those things, and so we wanted to just give you an overview of how we work and why we work this way, and I hope we've covered that.